gaat kijken. Ben je nog aan het kijken? Ben je nog aan het kijken? Ben je nog aan het kijken?
Met Xander de Rijke.
My advice to you is seek professional help.
Hello everybody and welcome to Ben je nog aan het kijken? The podcast where we talk to guests about their favorite shows or about their career in television. I am your host Xander de Rijke and today we are talking to the legendary actor and voice talent John Kassir. He has a diverse list of accomplishments throughout the years, ranging from performing as a stand-up comic and even sharing the stage with Robin Williams to his more known work in film and television. He has guest starred in dozens of TV series and appeared in many feature films, like my personal favorite, The Three Stooges biopic from 2000. But he is best known for his voiceover work in animation and video games. You might have heard him as Miko the raccoon from Disney's Pocahontas, or as Rizzo and the Ghost Roaster in Skylanders. However, he is the most recognized for his work as the voice of the wisecracking Crypt Keeper in Tales from the Crypt, an HBO TV series adapted from the horror comic anthology series. Please welcome to the podcast, Boils and Ghouls, my favorite storyteller, John Kassir.
Ben je nog aan het kijken?
I do have to say one more thing. When I started this podcast about a year ago, you were the first name I noted down on guests I wanted to have for this podcast.
Thanks, man. That's cool.
Yeah, I binged the Tales from the Crypt again during the lockdown, and John Kassir was the first name I typed down.
That's awesome. It's,
So,
I collected the comic, but I'll talk about this on the show. So,
well, I want to start fully at the beginning because I'm a comedian myself, and if I'm correct, you started out as a stand-up comedian.
I actually started out as a theater actor, and I'll tell you the whole story.
Yeah.
I started out as a theater actor. I studied since I was a kid. I loved it. And I went to college to study theater and got my degree in theater and got my first off-Broadway show. Mm-hmm. Right out of college. And, it closed after 3 weeks of inner fighting between the producers and the creative team and that kind of thing. So I kind of got a taste of what that was going to be like.
Yeah.
I was getting $175 a week, which in New York, even in the 1980s, was really, really very little to live off of. Yeah. And so I started doing stuff like street performing and that kind of thing to make a living, and got pretty well known as a as a street performer in front of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. Performing on the street, and then I got in an off-Broadway show, a musical called Three Guys Naked from the Waist Down, which was
Was that a literal thing?
About stand-up comics.
Okay.
You know this show Dreamgirls?
Yeah.
Yeah, think Dreamgirls, but with stand-up comics. So it was a musical with 3 stand-up comics, and when it went through its different versions of workshops and out-of-town runs and that kind of thing, by the time we got into New York, it was myself, along with Scott Bakula, who you know from NCIS New Orleans, Quantum Leap, and all these great shows. And Scott's been a dear friend for many, many years. Mm-hmm. And you're talking 1985 when we finally opened off Broadway, and it was a really well received, big hit, and especially for me. Having street performed, but not really done stand-up comedy. I had done sketch comedy for a number of years with people that I'd gone to college with. We had a group called Animal Crackers, which was kind of like, Saturday Night Live, but every Friday and Saturday nights in a small theater in Baltimore, Maryland, where I grew up.
Kind of like the Groundlings, kind of version of the Groundlings.
Yeah, similar, but less improv, more sketch comedy. We did some improv, but most of it was written sketches. We would write a new show every month and get, local celebrities, the weatherman on the local station or whatever, to come in as our celebrity. And really had a great time. It was really well received, but I had that background, and I had some, material I had been doing since I was a kid, but here I was doing Three Guys Naked in New York, and I was discovered by a person who was had a new show called Star Search, which was, you know, you see all these shows, American Idol and The Voice and, you know, Last Comic Standing and all these great, you know, shows. America's Got Talent, Britain's Got Talent. You know, do they have Copenhagen has talent?
Europe got talent. No, actually, I got my start in a comedy competition on television also. 15 years ago.
So this was, you know, they had actors, singers, you know, spokesmodels, bands, and comics, you know, on the show. And they asked me to be on the show as their first season. And I was like, as a, you know, here I was doing a musical. I thought they wanted me to come as a singer. And I said, you know, I can sing, but the guy they had on the show was Sam Harris, who was winning all these weeks, was phenomenal. I mean, I couldn't sing like him. I mean, this guy, you know, has produced many albums over the years and sang on Broadway and all these things. And, you know, I certainly had a good singing voice, but not to compete on that level of as a singer. So they said, no, we want you to be as a stand-up comic. And I said, well, you know, I'm not really a stand-up comic. I'm playing the part in the show. They said, well, you know, it says you used some of your material from your street act and this and this. They go, you know, you can win $100,000. And I'm like, well, fuck.
Yeah.
You know, where do I sign up?
Pretending to be a comedian is half the work.
That's it. That's it. It's like when you go play golf, you know, it's like you're playing bad and it's like all of a sudden you pretend to be a golfer, you know, and all of a sudden you get better.
Yeah.
So, you know, I wound up on the show and, you know, I immediately started scrambling to all my bits. You know, I used to do, you know, even with a buddy in high school, I used to do this bit where I do the Wizard of Oz in 2.5 minutes, you know. As mayor of the Munchkin City in the county of the land of Oz. What's them? What's them? That's the castle of the Wicked Witch. Oh, Dorothy's in that awful place. Oh, I hate to think of her in there. Fellas, we've got to get her out. I got a plan how to get in there, and you're going to lead us. All right, I'll go in here for Dorothy. Wicked Witch or no Wicked Witch. Guards or no guards is just one thing I want you fellas to do. What's that? Talk me out of it. You know, so I was going on the show, and each week I kept winning, and I'd have to come up with a new bit. So I was just pulling out whatever, you know, bit I could. And I think because I had no material, I had to write things specifically for a 2.5 minute format, which is what they gave you. And I think that's might be one of the reasons that I won, as opposed to trying to disassemble my act, you know, take apart my act and put it into 2.5 minutes each week. Yeah. And by the time I got to the semifinals, I went up against Rosie O'Donnell, who was, you know, we all know now, but was completely unknown at the time, and but who had been playing the clubs for years and was, you know, obviously talented. And then I went up against a comedian called Sinbad. I think you probably know Sinbad, and you know, who also had been doing this for years. And I beat him in the finals, and all of a sudden they're like, okay, you're going to open for Tom Jones in Las Vegas. I was like, everybody's patting me on the back. They're going, congratulations. I go, how could I open for Tom Jones? I got no fucking act. You know? So
I do have to imagine not being a comedian pure blood then, opening for an act like Tom Jones in Las Vegas. What I can imagine is not the most fun audience for a comedian. Must have been quite a job.
Well, you know, it's funny, having done theater and worked in theaters as much as 2,000 people at a time, you know, was my training. So I really treated it more like it was an act, you know, and when you have a bigger audience, it slows everything down in terms of laughter and that kind of thing. I mean, a club is harder because, you know, people are drunk. They've come from all different places. They expect all the laughs, you know, they expect it to be you to be ready to take whatever they throw at you, including, you know, their beer. and and move on from there. So, I mean, I immediately went to a headliner in clubs and this kind of thing. And, I opened for Rodney Dangerfield and Richard Belzer and Lou Rawls and the Temptations and the Four Tops on their TNT tour, which was for 5,000 people in a round indoor-outdoor theater, and the stage turned as I was doing my act, and a lot of my act was visual. I would do bits like where I would have like my arms stuffed and this hand would come up out of my, get me high, and then try to get me to commit suicide, and this kind of, so, and this whole thing, that was my act. So, I was developing my act as I was in front of a first-class audience. But actually opening for big acts was a little easier than the clubs at first because I could do it as a solid act. It didn't have to be something that was evolving in the club and playing off of. And I had come from improv, so it was easy for me to improvise off of people. People were like, "Oh, you're going to be the next Robin Williams," but nobody could be the next Robin Williams, obviously. But that's kind of what it felt like was what was expected of me.
So how much time was there between you performing on the street and you opening in Vegas?
Less than a year.
Amazing. Yeah.
Obviously I had a lot of experience on stage and street performing. There's nothing more difficult because you are playing against everything's improvised. Even if you do something that you did before, like something would happen, somebody would pull up in a limousine in front of the museum and you'd have a bit, you'd create a bit. You'd climb in the limousine with them and go, drive down the street. I drive down the street. I come back putting my clothes on like they had, I'd had sex in the limo or whatever, and you're doing it for people sitting on the steps coming out of the museum. And it's like an amphitheater with the entire city going on behind you. Yeah. And, I used to climb the building. For years, they were redoing the stone face on a building across the street. And they had scaffolding there. And I used to climb the building and hang a banner up there, people could see me from blocks in either direction. And I would come down and do my act. And, so, some of this was, to me was easier than street performing. But you only had to do 20 minutes as an opening act, 20 minutes, 30 minutes at the most, going to the club as a headliner, in a comedy club, I had to do an hour and a half material. And so, I started working in the clubs and building my act. And, I didn't really have jokes. I wasn't really what you'd call a monologist telling jokes. Yeah. So, my act was based on a guy who was addicted to television. And so I would do all these voices and characters and, imitate a Godzilla movie. Doing all this stuff. And so, doing all these voices and stuff as I started to get onto sitcoms and shows in LA. I moved to LA at that point because, everybody knew me as a stand-up comic in Los Angeles. Here I came from New York as this, and Three Guys Naked was such a hit that, all of a sudden people wanted me to audition for Lincoln Center, which is, the big nonprofit theater in New York and for their Broadway shows and all this stuff. But when Hollywood came a calling and you knew that you could, instead of making $175, I think, off Broadway, I think I was making $600-700 a week, And then, I think that the top that off Broadway pays is like $950 a week, $1,000 a week. On Broadway, if you're fortunate enough to get into a big show and as one of the main characters, you can make, a couple $1,000, whatever, a couple thousand to $5,000, even $10,000 if you're playing, Jean Valjean or something like that. But unless you're a star, who are making, filling those seats every night and they're making a lot of money, you're not making money in the theater. So, them asking me to come and do television in LA I jumped on it.
Yeah, you
And
naturally pivoted more to acting than comedy.
yeah, I mean, I was an actor.
Yeah.
Obviously, I was labeled as a comedic actor, so most of my acting work was comedic in the beginning of my career now in LA. And I had been doing it, I've been out of college 6 years now and, struggling in New York for many, many years prior to this happening. And then, so it wasn't like I was a beginner. But at the same time, here I was in LA auditioning for people. I didn't know who they were. I didn't know how big they were as producers or casting directors or studio people or any of these people that I was auditioning for. I think if I had known, it probably would have freaked me out more than it did. And, when I look back on it, people go, oh my gosh, you had so much, you were pretty brash. You were, pretty, and I was like, well, I really, that was hiding fear because I didn't know who any of you were. I came from, theater and street performing to auditioning for, the Coen brothers and, every major sitcom. Alan Burns gave me one of my first series on television. And Alan Burns created Mary Tyler Moore and Lou Grant and, Rhoda and all these shows that, with Betty White and all these great shows, and those are the people that I was all of a sudden, auditioning for and working with and, big stars in every single one of those shows. So, it was a big deal, but people started to realize, in my act, I did all these voices and characters that my first long-term series that I worked on, First and 10, was on HBO, and HBO was just in, a small percentage of households at that time. It
young and upcoming channel.
Yeah, it was just, it was starting out, and I was on this show, First and 10, which was about a American football team.
Yeah.
And I played the kicker. I could kick 60-yard field goals, and my name was Zagreb Shkenuski. Yes, I play for the California Bulls. I fuck you both, yes? So he was this guy all of a sudden let loose on America with no idea of cause and effect and given all this money, and he just thought he could do anything, Yeah. And O.J. Simpson was on the show. He played the general manager, and Delta Burke, who was on Designing Women. This was her first show, and she was the owner of the team. And every week we would have these huge football stars on the show that I would, have scenes with. And
were you a football guy?
Was that?
Were you a football guy?
Oh, I loved football. I played football in high school, but I was only 135 pounds, so I was a running back. But once they went from what they call junior varsity, where you play where you're on the younger team and then you move to varsity. I played 2 days with varsity and I got my ass kicked. So I was like, the next day I was on the pitch playing soccer, European football. And, I had never played in my life, and we had the best team in the state. Mm-hmm. And so I made the team on my athleticism, but, when I played on the junior varsity soccer team, I played a lot. When I went to the varsity team, I sat the bench because these guys were good. But, I played lacrosse. I don't know if you know that sport there, but it's, with the stick where you pass the ball. It's like hockey, but on a field, and the ball's passed in the air. It's a North American sport that's very popular here. And, I even got scholarships to play in college for that sport and that kind of thing. That was my sport. But, they had a professional kicker come show me how to line up properly and look like I know what I was doing. Yeah. And, I could kick something up to maybe about 40 yards, which isn't that far for a professional kicker, but without, pressure. Like they wouldn't let me kick when they had to make it look like, the kicker was being rushed by 300-pound guys because they didn't want me to get hurt. Yeah. But, so I could sell the idea of it, having played soccer and, was able to, being athletic and that kind of thing. So it was, was able to be believable as this, communist bloc person who escaped from his country and wound up in the United States making all this money, kicking for the California Bulls. And but when I was doing that show, I had gotten on some other shows, Dream On, and some other guest stars and that kind of thing on other shows. And HBO called the casting director from HBO called my agents and said, we want you to come down and audition for Tales from the Crypt. And I was like, oh my God, I collected these comic books when I was a kid. I loved those comic books. I can't believe they're making a show out of this. And I just thought, of course, it was just going to be some cult show. Yeah. That wasn't going to last very long, and it was, you're thinking, oh, it's just a voiceover job, probably doesn't pay that much, blah, 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 so you're thinking, but it would be so fun to do because I love that franchise so much. And then, of course, they told me I was auditioning down in Kevin Yeager's studio. And Kevin, of course, was the creature maker who made the puppet, but also made Chucky and designed Freddy Krueger and became a great director for some of the Phantasm. I mean, Kevin's just one of the top in the business. Yeah. And to go into his studio was just a cool thing. And, then they gave me the copy with all the funny puns and all that stuff. And I could see some of the other people who were auditioning going, be careful what you ask for. You may get it. They're like, oh my God, this is terrible. They're like thinking this is terrible. And I'm like, no. I'm thinking to myself, those guys don't get it. This is like Shakespeare to this guy. So, immediately I started going into gear and this is what he looked like. Well, there was actually like an earlier version of him. Kevin didn't have a big budget, so he took some of the mechanics and the eyes and that kind of thing from one of his Chucky dolls, and he started creating the Crypt Keeper on him, and the mouth barely moved and that kind of thing. Of course, once we got a better budget on the show and the show was a hit, they gave him more money to spruce him up and recreate how he moved.
I was going to ask if you got the chance to see the puppet so you can sculpt the voice a little bit.
Yeah, well, that was it. He had different versions of it. I mean, ultimately, there was the one that they wound up using, but he also had other versions of it that he was working on, his sculptures, and even had made some of the, rubber heads and stuff that they were going to be using in the studio. So I got to see what it looked like. Mm-hmm. And I could see he had holes in his throat. So I thought I'd give him this texture, And from doing The Wizard of Oz, I go, I'll throw in the Wicked Witch laugh, and, as a kid, I loved Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and he used to do all these really great puns and the way he'd do it with one eyebrow raised. And I was like, this is who this guy is. And Kevin didn't even have a recording studio. He just had a boombox with a lavalier mic for me to hold on to and start recording this for him on a cassette tape. But I was doing it for him, and he probably had listened to like tons and tons of them, and he was sitting there like this, and all of a sudden I started doing it, and he was like, and he's laughing, and I start laughing, and I was like, oh great, the character laughs at his own his own jokes, and this is how it evolved right there in the audition. And I mean, I heard back from them like almost immediately, and they said, the next day they had me in a just a work trailer where they had on the set where they had already started shooting the show with Joel Silver and Richard Donner, who, Richard Donner, one of the biggest producers in the business. And of course, Joel Silver had his hands in everything back then. I mean, you name it. It was big movies and Die Hard movies and the, Lethal Weapon movies and all these movies. I mean, these were the guys that I auditioned for. And the other producers, of course, were Bob Zemeckis and David Giler, who did Alien, and Walter Hill, who's an amazing director. And they were going to be doing, Walter, Bob, and Richard Donner were going to do the first 3 episodes.
Yeah, there's not an episode that goes by without like a name popping up or somebody in the screen. You think, they're in this also? Like it's insane. It's a roster. You can't imagine making that show now.
It's unbelievable. I don't know how they would. I don't know if they could afford to. I don't know if they could get the people to do it. It's not only that, getting the rights back from EC Comics has been, challenging. It's, they want to do something different with it. So we've not been able to get them back to do more. But so I'm auditioning for them. in this little trailer and they're loving it. And I'm just like, I'm thinking, oh my God, okay. They said, well, okay, we'll see you on the set. Of course, you don't believe anything in my business until they actually like call you up and go, okay, just start recording, and the show was very expensive to do right off the bat, and they were going to cancel it. And then they got Gil Adler, who I zoomed with him the other day. He's in another part of the world producing whatever. Talked to him. He had been around for years and years, and he had been doing Freddy's Nightmares, and he came in and was able to do the show on the budget that they needed to do it on. So it got picked up for all these episodes and continued to be picked up. And he was like, we need to get stars on this show. And, Joel and all them were like, well, how are we going to do that? Nobody is going to work for scale. I go, they will. There's serious actors who want to do comedy. There's actors who want to direct, who they got in, Tom Hanks and Michael Keaton and Arnold Schwarzenegger and, all these different people. And of course you get, people who loved horror like Frankenheimer and, all these different people to come in and direct episodes. And before you know it, it was a playground. Of course, Joel and Richard, Dick and Bob and all these people working with all these top artisans in the business, said, hey, if you're available, come in and do this for us. You're not going to get paid much, but you'll get, autonomy to have fun. And basically with no money, they had to create things, they built a set like this, but then, if they needed like Spanish moss, it would be a cardboard Spanish moss hanging in the foreground, and that's, the old school way they used to create things. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that's how you come up with the best stuff because, you have to, you don't have everything at your fingertips.
Yeah.
It's like when I see CGI these days, the more sophisticated it gets, the more the older stuff looks dated.
Yeah.
But when you do practical effects, the way they do in horror and that kind of thing, they stand up forever.
That's
you can still watch Night of the Living Dead and it's still so visceral, They're probably holding sausages and entrails from the butcher shop or whatever, but it looks so real and, whatever they're using for blood and, it's in black and white and the sound effects.
Even the intro with the house. Was it a real house? Did they build a house?
For the miniature. And they built like a miniature set and a miniature camera setup just to do all of it, to come up to it. And then it goes into a full-size set for the living room. Then it goes down into a CGI'd staircase and then it back onto a set. So it's like a combination. This set was where it winds up is a real set where all the Crypt Keeper sequences were shot and they kept that set for years. In fact, there's some fun stuff where, when I first came down to the set, when they were first shooting, just to take a look, there were all these faces carved up into the ceiling that you can't even see on the show. But it's all the faces of the producers and Kevin and, and there they were carving my face into the ceiling that day. And I was just like, oh my God, it's like the artisans just having fun doing something unique for posterity. But they treated it like the comic book. They treated it like it was something collectible, like it was something that could be around for a long time. And if it was going to be around for a long time, it was going to be something that, every fan would enjoy. But who knew it was going to become pop culture of its time, the 90s, especially since it was on HBO. I mean, here it was. We're thinking only adults would watch it because of the content and the nudity and the language and because it was on HBO and you had to pay for HBO and blah, 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 blah. But because it was on HBO, kids got to watch it because parents didn't know they were watching something they weren't supposed to be watching. Yeah. Or their parents were hip enough to let them watch it. Or like I had people come to me and they go, my parents wouldn't let me watch it. So I watched it on the weekends with my grandmother. We loved it. We bonded together, And, but but we didn't know kids were watching it. I mean, we came out with the cartoon for kids, and I kept saying we need to do a live action version for the kids. They're like, no, they'll never let us do it. It's too expensive. It's it's too scary for kids. And then of course they came out with Goosebumps, which was a big hit. And I was like, see, I told you. But little did we know, kids were watching it anyway.
Oh yeah.
There is, the adults, those kids that are now adults, it's bigger with them, and there's a bigger audience of them than there was an adult audience back when we first put the show on the air.
I remember it airing in Belgium for the first time around the mid 90s when it was going on for a couple of years in America. But the beauty of it was, I was just thinking about it today. If you would take away the Crypt Keeper, it would be a much harsher show. And, and in his own way, he's like this little guidance into something darker.
Yeah.
Because I always felt if he said, hello, kiddies, I was like, I'm a kid, so this is for me.
Oh, totally. How could you not walk past a TV set and see a puppet talking to you and go, hello, creeps. Hello, boils and ghouls. And not as a kid, how could you not walk past? I mean, my favorite stuff as a kid was to sit in front of the TV set and watch all the Universal horror monster movies. Mm-hmm. They were incredible. Anything with a theremin,
Yeah.
But yeah, this is what the appeal was. And of course, then after it had been on the air, it was picked up by Fox Television here, which was a network television. So they had to edit out the, language and nudity and cut it for commercials and stuff. And so, it was cut down a bit, but, so some of the kids' first introduction to it was edited versions anyway. But, then when they were able to watch it later and get it on, DVD and all this stuff, it was like, oh my God, uncut. But, the Crypt Keeper is designed to be that guy. He's the tongue-in-cheek guy who's letting you know this is supposed to be fun.
Yeah.
That it is comic book, that it's like a roller coaster, right? You're taking the ride on the roller coaster, and the ride up, the anticipation before it goes down. I mean, the roller coaster could ultimately not be that scary of a one, or it could suck or whatever, but the anticipation of what it's going to bring you is never fails to give you that feeling, and the Crypt Keeper is that ride up to the top of the roller coaster before they take you on the ride. And depending on the story and who directed it and who acted in it and stuff like that, they have completely different tones to them. Some of them scary, some of them funny, some of them like, that one was okay. And you're like, oh my God, how did they do such a great job on that one in just a half hour, but the Crypt Keeper stuff was very, very consistent. If you watch the first couple of seasons, because, let me find the right, there you go. The mouth barely worked on the original puppet because, Kevin had used, existing mechanics and stuff like that. So we had to slow down the way he spoke. And he was more ominous and creepy. But it's not what I had auditioned. And once we got the budget to spruce him up and I could make him talk faster and stuff, of course, then all, bars, all holds were no holds barred, you could do anything you wanted. And because I did impersonations and all this stuff, they started using my talents to do, the Crypt Keeper as John Wayne, or the Crypt Keeper as Marlon Brando in A Streetcar Named Desire, Stella, and they put, his bony little arms in the t-shirt, and, as Howard Stern as a shock jock, and all these different things. And we had great writers on the show. Gil Adler, who was, the showrunner at that time, was also a great writer and directed a number of the episodes, and Alan Katz and some of these amazing people that worked on the show. Wrote great stuff for the Crypt Keeper. And of course, I would improvise some stuff
Well,
just to make them laugh. And
ask.
some of the stuff would just wind up in the show the next week. And I go, I better watch out what I say. I'd be like, I love a girl who'll give you head and then let you keep it. I never thought that would wind up in the sequence, but of course, it was in there the next week. They had the Crypt Keeper in bed for a Valentine's Day, with a box of chocolates and puts his arm around the dead corpse, and her head falls in his lap, and he delivers that line. And, it was great. So, it was such a creative process for us. And I mean, it never kept me from doing other work, because I would just go into the studio and record this stuff when they could get to it, or when I was available. So, I mean, I was able to do multiple series at the same time through all the years I was doing Tales from the Crypt. And because of its popularity and high profile as a voice actor, it launched an entire voice career for me.
Yeah.
Which, as anybody who knows as an actor or loves actors and can see their favorite actors slowly disappear off the screen, or off the screen, as the Crypt Keeper would say. As we get older, there's just less and less parts for us. And, they go to the same, couple of handfuls of actors over and over and over again. And I mean, I still get work on camera. I still get work in the theater if I want to. But, it's not the challenging stuff that I got to do when I was younger. And so it's extended my career as a voice actor, because as a voice actor, it's extended my career, way beyond what most actors get to work, because I'm not limited by my age or sex. I mean, I played female characters. I played so many characters that are not human, whether it's animals or creatures.
Well, I was going to ask about that. You have this amazing voiceover resume. And I see a lot of creature voice work. Like, how did you discover that?
I've been doing that since I was a kid. So it was stuff that when somebody gave me a chance to do it, they go, "Oh my God, you do that!" And once you got a high profile one, I remember auditioning to play Miko in Pocahontas, and I had done some other stuff for Disney. And so I go to their big animation building, the Frank G. Wells building, and I'm sitting in this huge lobby waiting. And somebody, the casting director comes out and goes, "Okay, John, can you come on in?" I go, "Well, I haven't seen the script." They go, "There is no script," because you're thinking, okay, it's a raccoon, but the animals usually talk in Disney movies, or they often do. I won't say usually, they often do. And so I walk into a huge soundstage where they just have all these storyboards and pictures of Miko doing different things. And they're like, "Okay, so we want, obviously you need to do human emotions to him and stuff like that, but we want him to sound like a real raccoon." And I grew up living near the woods. And when I lived in LA and I could buy my first house, I bought a house on a creek where the woods are all around me. And I know every sound a raccoon makes. I've heard them fight. I've heard them kill each other. I've heard them fuck each other. I've heard and I'm doing all this stuff for them and they're laughing. And I'm thinking I'm either offending the shit out of them or I got the job, And so they're like, "Okay, he runs, he gets through a log. When he comes out the other end of the log, he's in midair and he looks down and it's like a 40-foot drop. So he falls, but he doesn't want to fall. He's fighting the air. He goes into the water. He pops up, spits out, shakes it off, and makes a happy sound. Go." So, I do that for them. They're like, "Oh my God. Okay, great." So I never heard from them. I thought that I didn't get the part. Like 6 months later, my agents go, "Okay, so your first session for Pocahontas." I go, "Wait a minute. What do you mean my first session?" They're like, "Oh, yeah, you got the part." I was like, "Oh, nobody told me." They're like, "You're kidding. We never told you got the part?" I was like, "No, I'd never, and I have the best agents in the business and you never mess up that kind of thing. But for some reason, I never got the word that I had gotten the part." And so there I was, in the studio recording that. And it was, all of a sudden I started getting asked to come in after that came out. I started getting asked to come in and audition for animal sounds. And, I had, auditioned a number of years for The Simpsons and, for different parts and that kind of thing. But you pretty much use the same cast for everything, but they needed somebody to come in and do animal sounds, whether it was, there was an episode where I did Santa's little helper, the little dog, and, there was an episode where Bart and Homer let all the animals out of the zoo, and I had to do all the animals from the zoo. And, there was all the, a donkey who was in love with Homer. I mean, there was many different animals that they had me coming in and doing. That started to even grow that more. But, casting directors, you could see that I could do different vocal things. And so they'd start bringing me in for these creatures and things. And, years later, they came in and they wanted me to come in and do Elliot in the new version, the reimagined version of Pete's Dragon. And then I got calls to do some more raccoon stuff. And then I got calls to do the squirrel. They go, oh, well, you can do a raccoon. You must be able to do a squirrel. Come on in and audition. We would love you. They didn't even audition me. They just asked me to do it. Was the squirrel in Flora and Ulysses last year, which was a wonderful movie. And, which was a whole nother thing, because each time it's a little different. It's not just an animal that they want, but they want something that has like its own speech, and it has its own little jazz to it, and it has its own little, human emotions that come across, but still sound like the animal, and so it's not always easy to do. And sometimes you're experimenting for the first session or two before you find it. And
I respect it a lot. Sometimes I'm watching a movie and you see somebody like Tom Kenny pop up doing like a monkey or something, and going, oh, even the guy from SpongeBob is even doing stuff like that. It shows off an incredible range. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's not easy. I mean, I did a lot of stuff for Planet of the Apes, for all the new Planet of the Apes franchises. Johnny Gickham, who's the voice director, voice caster, who brings in all of us to do all those ape sounds throughout the movie. Is depending, and they have big guys who are doing the bigger apes and little guys who are doing the littler apes and that kind of thing. And women who have to do the female apes and the chimpanzees. And I mean, you're doing all these things. And again, they need it to sound realistic, but they also need it to have human emotions in a way that's specific, and to get everybody on the same page doing it, It's a tough job. It's a tough job, and it's hard on the voice. A lot of the video games that I do is all screaming and dying and that kind of thing. Because of the Crypt Keeper voice, a lot of people want that, kind of, things added to it. That
just doing that brought me back to Diablo 3 for some reason. You made that voice, and I played Diablo 3 for a very long time. And that just made me think of Diablo 3.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. It's, how it works. But, I feel grateful. I mean, I worked very hard at it, obviously. I mean, the first 5-6 years of my career, I barely, I had to hide money. I'd lose all the change that I would get from street performing. I would purposely lose some in my apartment so that if I ran out of money, I would go, there's got to be some change around somewhere where I can get a slice of pizza, And so it was tough. I lived in Spanish Harlem in New York, which was not a great neighborhood, but slowly but surely just had faith that I would get there, kept my eye on the prize and worked hard to get there. And I mean, I probably, after winning Star Search, my face could have been more, famous, and I could have gone that route. But to me, it felt like I really wasn't a stand-up comic, and to exploit that would have meant that my career would have been half on the road, playing in front of live audiences, which I love, but to be taken seriously as an actor, not that I needed to be taken seriously as an actor. I enjoyed comedy so much, but to be thought of as somebody who you could cast in things that they've written, as opposed to just doing your own stuff, was something that I, worked hard to, be able to create, just to have longevity in my career, instead of going, oh, okay, that guy was famous for, a couple of years, then he went away. I didn't want to be that guy.
No, John,
I wanted to make a living at this. If I didn't do this, I don't know what I would have done. I was dyslexic and not very good student as a kid. And, I made my way through school with personality and there were teachers that gave me the opportunity to stand up front of the class and, present my stuff that way so that I could do that better than, reading out of the book and writing a paper and that kind of stuff. And so there were teachers that recognized that in me and, helped me along in terms of developing what my skills were.
Well, anyway, it's an impressive resume. Nonetheless, I did want to ask about one thing in your resume, because I'm a big comedy fan and a big American comedy fan. The Three Stooges movie, I watched this for the first time a couple of days ago. You did an amazing Shemp.
Thank you. It was truly one of the honors of my career, Mel Gibson was producing it, so he had access to their families to get and they based it on the only authorized biography of their lives. We had access to their home movies. We had access to a lot of different things. And originally they thought of me and I came in an audition to play Larry. I mean, people who've known my career for years, I used to have all this bushy, curly hair, and I was starting to bald on top and the whole thing, which is why I wound up cutting it all off. But, I went into audition for Larry. And while I was in the middle of the audition, they were like, wow, you're great as Larry, but we're not having problems finding actors who can play Larry. We need a Shemp. Could you go home and prepare that and come back? And, and I went home and I found this floppy wig that I had. I put it on backwards so that it was long in my face.
Yeah.
And I came in, I prepared it because, the secret to it, I mean, they have Three Stooge impersonators in Vegas and all over the world doing the Stooges, but they didn't want impersonations. They wanted somebody who could capture, who these characters were. And, Moe's daughter, Ms. Mora, told me that, she used to talk about her uncle, talk about how he was this, extremely talented and funny man, but also very neurotic and had a lot of phobias and was afraid of animals. And when they had animals on the set, he used to make them put a pane of glass between him and the animals. And, he was afraid to sleep in hotels because he was afraid of getting bed bugs, and which back then they're probably more prevalent, and this kind of thing. So it was interesting to go, okay, that's where he's coming from. And that's where a lot of this stuff comes from. And, and to see that in the script, they had done so much to bring the vulnerabilities of these characters across and, what their struggles were over 20 something years, of working for Columbia Pictures. And, in fact, just the other day, my old friend there, Michael Chiklis, who played Curly, and we all loved Curly as kids because he was the most childlike. Yeah. But I was one of the few kids that I knew that loved Shemp just as much because he was just funny. He was just so good. He could do so many things that the other Stooges couldn't do, beyond that, and wound up in all those great movies, Joe Palooka movies and all these other movies playing characters as well, which the other actors never got a chance to do. But, so, when I had the opportunity to do it, and we shot in Australia because Mel's production company was there, and the coastline looked like Malibu and the LA coastline long before it was developed, and they had all these old theaters, and they had, there was all these, budget things that they could do that were, incentives that the government was giving to bring production there and stuff like that. And I just had it was right after they launched the Millennium from Australia. I don't know if you remember when 2000 came, they launched the huge off the bridge in Sydney Harbor where the Opera House is. They launched the huge fireworks show, and because that's where one of the first places for it to turn 2000, they launched it on television from there. At least they did in the States, and. So it was, and they were going to have the Olympics there that year. So they were building their stadiums and they were doing all this stuff. and Sydney was hopping. And we shot literally, I was there a day or two after the millennium. And they put us up in a building they call it the Toaster, because it looks like a big, big toaster right on the quay, that literally you look out your window and the Opera House is right down outside your window. And you're looking out over the quay, and there's the QE2, the Queen Mary 2, parked in the middle of the harbor. And I mean, there's all these different things. And that's their summer, is January, February into March when we were shooting. And it's just one of the most, for all those reasons, it was just one of the best times I've ever had. And the other actors were great. Evan Handler, obviously, wonderful. Paul Ben-Victor, wonderful.
Yeah, now looking back, knowing there's a Three Stooges movie with Michael Chiklis, almost sounds surreal. But
it does.
He did a great job. He was an amazing cook.
He's amazing. He's perfectly cast for it too. Michael's a great actor, and but he has fond memories of it too. And he just posted something on Twitter just the other day, and I added my own some photos from it. If you look up my Twitter page, John Kassir, at John Kassir, you'll see the post plus I posted some photos of us posing with Mel Gibson, and there's some pictures from the TV Guide that month. The month they put it out, with us in the TV Guide and that kind of thing. It was cool. It was one of those things I'll always remember as a milestone in my career.
Yeah, I love the drama you brought to that character.
Thank you.
There's something so heartbreaking about a guy who just hates getting hurt, but also is stuck in a slapstick trio.
Hey, soften your hands. Well, it was funny because they showed us how they used to do the eye poke, and because Shemp had come up with that originally, and they were like, the secret is to hit the eyebrow and then react to it. You can't tell, boop, and I was like, oh, and they wrote a whole scene where we're eye poking each other, and so we had to work on that, so we didn't actually poke each other in the eyes multiple times.
Thank you so much for spending this time. You obviously answered these questions before, because I only asked like 2 questions. That's okay.
I don't. You asked the questions that just like launched my thoughts about this, It's like you don't have, first of all, they think actors like to talk about themselves a lot, and it's hard because if you're asking me about my career, I could talk about that because it astonishes me that I had the opportunity to do a lot of things that I did. This kid from Baltimore, I had no leg up. I wasn't born into the business. I came from nothing, with no money, moving to New York and street performing, and so I, always felt that there was, my parents were like, oh, you got to study something to fall back on. I was like, anything that I would fall back on to me would be harder because my talents I was born with the talents that I have. And if I can make a living doing that, I just really wanted to make a living. I really just wanted to be a theater actor. But I mean, the living was so small that, when I had the opportunity to, move into television and film and voiceover and all these other things, really I've kept a career now, professional career since 1980. That's 42 years, I've been doing this, professionally and made a living at it and, not had other jobs. Even when I was street performing, like I might take a job for a friend helping to paint an apartment or something like that, or working in the paint store where they worked or that kind of thing. But other than that, I made my living street performing because I wanted to do it with my own talents and, to be able to do that. So, I kind of feel lucky. So if somebody asks me about, well, how did you get here? If I think back on it, sometimes it's more lucid than others. You could have got me on another day and I was like, wow, I don't even remember when that happened, but then it kind of opens up a floodgate sometimes when somebody asks you a question about, well, how did that evolve? What was that audition like, and that kind of thing?
Well, you did do a play about marijuana for a pretty long time. So if things get foggy, you know, kind of know.
Reefer Madness, faster, Sally, faster. I mean, Reefer Madness was was a passionate project because a friend of mine, Andy Fickman, who I had met years ago, he used to run Bette Midler's production company when I met him after winning Star Search, and somebody put me in the office with him and said, "You guys would get along great. You'll come up with something fun to create." And years later, nothing ever worked out, but Andy and I had done some improv stuff together, and he called me up and he goes, "Listen, these guys wrote this musical and they saw you in Three Guys Naked years ago when they were very young, and they thought of you for this part." And the part really wasn't fleshed out yet at all. Mm-hmm. And I was like, "God, Andy, I'm on Tales from the Crypt. I'm on First and 10. I'm on this other show called FM. I was like, I got a lot on my plate." He was like, "Listen, this is going to be fucking fun." And I was like, "Okay, I'm in," and, went from 2 years in a little theater in LA and became an instant hit there. I mean, nothing becomes a hit in a little theater in LA like that, and this just launched a whole new genre of, films being made into movies, especially, horror movies or B movies or, exploitation films from the past. And there's been a slew of them since. And it just kept getting better and better. And, until we wound up in New York doing it off Broadway. And September 11th happened 3 days before we opened. Yeah. And which was, I could have done without being there for that. And that was a really tough time to be there and to experience that with, but it was amazing to see how New Yorkers stepped up and the rest of the world in terms of what happened there. But, then it moved on to doing something, extremely fun with it. And that was shooting it in Vancouver and making it into the movie. With some of a good handful of the original actors from the show and others that had come along in New York, and then some that were cast just for the movie. And every single one of those people that I've worked with, I have long-standing friendships with and relationships, because it was just one of those projects that that was like a theater project where everybody knows each other for a long time and works together. And so it was, again, you've put your finger on another, milestone, what I consider a milestone in my own career. Other people might pick other things. They're like, "Oh my God, you were the voice of Deadpool?" It was like, yeah, when it originally came out, I don't remember a lot about it other than I just thought he was so fun because he was so sarcastic and talked to the camera. You know, I remember I kept wanting to make him blue and, have him curse and do all that stuff. And they're like, "Nah, kids play this game." Of course, that's of course what the character was. And eventually when they got to make the movie, I was so glad to see that they went that far with it. Mm-hmm. It was so wonderful, but hey, thank you for some great questions. And I appreciate everyone who enjoys any work that I've done. The stuff that stands out usually is because I enjoyed it, and it was something that I enjoy as a fan, not just as somebody who was in it.
Well, it's always a pleasure to see your name pop up, except on stuff on eBay that goes for way too much money, to my liking. I do hope one thing, that the rights thing just gets solved so we can get Tales from the Crypt back to HBO Max or a streaming service in God's name. And also just a really good DVD box, because now I own a Spanish DVD box from Historias de la Cryptas.
That's hysterical. Probably doesn't even have my voice on it, but they usually keep the laugh and they get rid of, they have to.
No, it has the English version. I wouldn't allow it if it didn't have the version. I am going to ask for the Dance Monkey dance thing. Would it be possible for the Crypt Keeper to close us off if he's around?
Oh, sure. Be careful what you ask for, kiddies. You may get it.
Oh, God, I'm going to cry. Made me so happy.
And you know I'm gagging.
This was Ben je nog aan het kijken for this week. For the people interested, sadly, Tales from the Crypt isn't available to stream, but if you look hard enough, you can find it on DVD or on YouTube. Thank you for listening. Don't hesitate to drop something on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or our Discord if you enjoyed this episode and want to share it with your followers. I was your host, Xander de Rijke. Until next time, when we binge again in Ben je nog aan het kijken?
Ben je nog aan het kijken?
Met Xander de Rijke.